You're listening to Reason to Pot. You're listening to
What
Reason
show
to
is this?
Podcast. I was trying to think of how to warble that even more. You're listening to Reason Together Podcast. Is that what I'm supposed to say? I'm drawing a blank this morning.
You're
Reason
listening
Together.
to
You're listening to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. Yeah,
should I just leave this all in?
Yeah, maybe just leave it in.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of how I was going to say it. You're listening to Reason to Podcast, the reason the together for anyway. Okay, yeah, good
The
morning.
stuff for Christians who think about things.
Reasons. All right. So anyway, hopefully you kind of know where you're at. You know what you've clicked on. You know who you're listening to. I am your host, Daniel Fox, here along with my great friend Tom Balzamo. How are you, Tom?
Hey, good.
Good.
Had the privilege of paying a visit to Walmart this morning before our episode for some last-minute stocking stuffer things.
Oh, wow. That was kind of an early trip.
Yeah. Well, you got to go early in the morning. Fewer people there early in the morning.
All right. So, first, as we get started, if I can actually say this in coherent order, we want to thank our patrons who have subscribed over at patreon.com/reasontogether to support this podcast on an episode-by-episode basis on various tier levels. We want to thank you for your skin in the game and for supporting what we do here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. And we prayed for you before we started our podcast.
Indeed.
This morning for our patrons, for our listeners, and trust that the Lord will bless. I appreciate your pursuit of balance. That's kind of the way I perceive it. If somebody's listening to a podcast like this, they want to think through answers. They want to think. Yeah. They want to make wise decisions, and they're not coming here necessarily for straight answers, but just for joining a conversation that helps them to think through practical issues of life. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your support and for listening. Be sure to share the episodes with a friend. That would help us out and help us achieve our goals that we've set as a podcast. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, find somebody that you think as well is a balanced, equitable thinking Christian and say, hey, you might appreciate this. And send it their way.
Yeah. Now, in a little bit, we've had a puzzler question out there for a few weeks, given some time for folks to answer it. And we had asked the question, what Bible character knew that he was going to essentially bow down in the temple of a false god and asked in advance for pardon from the prophet of God. And so we have some folks who have answered that, and of the correct answers, and they were all correct, we are going to randomly choose one winner who will win the book right around Christmas time here, which works nicely. Is it Boyhood and Beyond or Beyond Boyhood? What's the title of that?
We decided to do the one on practical happiness.
Practical happiness.
Because we didn't know if our winner would have sons or boys or not. So
okay, yeah, same author, Bob Schultz. Good book anyway. And so you'll be getting another book around this holiday season. And so anyway, the winner will. And we will announce that here in a little bit. I think we ought to have some discussion first, though.
Yep.
Any other feedback, though, besides puzzler answers that we've received and need to deal with before we move on?
Some folks found our last episode fun.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. The episode where we talked about our favorite hymns.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
and if you haven't heard the little 3 minute snippets that Tom compiled for us of funny episode moments.
We must have been in a goofier mood that day or something.
Wow.
I just thought it was good to put that out there. We independent Baptists, we do have fun,
And to imagine that we could do that while talking about hymns. I mean, go figure.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that supposed to be like a dry discussion of like high and lofty British literature text or something.
Supposedly or something. So. I don't know. For me, over earnestness bothers me sometimes. You know,
Yeah.
if something is
Yeah.
if something is true, you can just say so. And I don't put aside any need for emotion or emotional appeals when needed. I'm not saying people can't ever say something earnestly, but you ever see someone who's saying something over earnestly, almost
Yeah,
too
probably.
serious, and that kind of bothers me. It's like, okay, it's true, we get it.
Kind of like
But
stating the obvious in a way that's meant to like really draw out your emotions.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when talking about hymns and music, music's an important subject, and I think many people approach it over earnestly, and that bothers me a little bit. We can say true things about music without sounding weird. So
As the clips might show. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, quickly before we jump in, your holiday season here, pretty chaotic and busy. I know you've got a big project you're working on. You've got 3, 4. You got 3 jobs going. I mean, you're being pulled in different directions.
Yeah, I was hoping to get it done well before Christmas, but it looks like it's going to be bleeding over a little bit until after Christmas.
Okay.
Unfortunately. So, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, if you're new to the podcast and you don't know this, Tom can do about everything. And so, yeah, if you need an X-ray taken, Tom can do that. If you need a cabinet built, Tom can do that. If you need somebody beat up for you, Tom can do that. If you need somebody to fill the pulpit, Tom can do that. So, because of that, the Lord's using those abilities to help support him as he plants a church in the Northeast.
Yeah, that was a very succinct way of saying those things. But no, I can't do everything. As you said, fact check false. Can't do everything.
Or Pinocchio, isn't it? Okay. I had a question here. Okay, we're going to come into this Christmas season and into New Year's. Family's going to get together, and we've talked before about being a game playing family. You're not really a game player, right? I mean, in this like
I am
board
not.
games.
No, my family loves games.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
just
but it's just not.
I guess I'm a curmudgeon. I don't know. I'm just not super into playing games.
Yeah, but a lot of folks out there are, and maybe different kinds of games.
I don't
whether
play
board
games,
Right.
man. I don't play games. Right? You got to say that while pointing a finger at somebody. I don't play games.
I don't play games.
I'm sorry. I cut you off.
Good.
Go ahead.
That's funny. So folks are going to be sitting down and playing games with their family, and I'm sure it'd be fun just to hear what people's favorite games are. Honestly, if you think about the subject of playing games itself, there really is an educational facet. I mean, an importance to teaching children to play games. Learning
Sure.
the strategy. There's just
Learning to lose.
Yes, learning to lose. The creativity that goes into thinking of a game. Sometimes maybe it's simple, and yet it's a lot of fun. And somebody came up with that game. We kind of have one of our children in particular who I say is the game maker. In fact, he's even made his own game boards, his own game pieces. He created his own game entirely. I looked into what it would cost to actually create the game.
That's funny.
Yeah. But anyway, so one side of the family in particular is game players for us. A lot of folks are going to be getting together and playing games. There's a wide variety of games. But my first question is, when we talk about games, there's different kinds of games. So you got Scrabble. Okay, you're trying to spell words. You got Uno. But then you've got games that I kind of perceive as a little bit more hawkish, meaning like I'm out to destroy you. And it is winning, but it's winning in sort of like a more cruel way. Namely, like say Monopoly or the game Sorry. Now, it's funny because even between my wife and I, we're very different in this way, and it's probably a personality thing. She hates the game Sorry. And if somebody doesn't know what that is, you're basically trying to get your 4 pieces around the board and into home. And meanwhile, people are like, knocking your pieces off and sending you back to start, and they're getting their pieces, or they're switching your pieces and make you go back and things like that. And when they do, sometimes they say sorry, but they're not really. For me, sorry is fun. I love that. Sorry, whatever. And she's like, oh man, that's terrible. Monopoly, I meant to like bleed you dry, suck the life out of you, kick you out of the game, stomp you, mash you down, and then take over the world.
For 6 hours straight. That game just drags on forever.
Right.
It's
agonizing. And it can be like
super
fun if you're like have a mild chance of winning. If you don't, it's just like purgatory. But so about a hawkish game like that, is there anything you think harmful's not quite the right word I'm looking for? Anything negative, say spiritually speaking, about exposing kids to that or teaching kids that kind of a mentality in a game?
But by hawkish, can you be more specific? Do you mean like competitive? What does hawkish mean?
By hawkish, I mean in like thinking of foreign policy. We're going to go in and have war. We're big on war. We're big on destroying things and asserting our dominance and things like that. And so in a sense, as I thought about it, I was like, well, it's still basically just winning. Every game has to have a winner. But Scrabble seems so much less hawkish because I'm spelling words. Okay, and it's like I try and you try. And I got a better word. I got more points. And so I outsmarted you in that way. I landed on the right squares. I got more points. Where Monopoly is, I try to drive you into the ground, take everything you have. Win by destroying. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what...
I can't say that I can think of anything inherently wrong with playing a game like that. The two people have agreed to play that. If someone suffers from sensitive feelings about having someone hawkishly destroy them in a game, don't play the game, or, learn to deal with that kind of feeling. So I can't necessarily say that there's anything wrong with playing the game in and of itself. I think it's gonna vary differently depending on who's playing. For me, one of the things that soured me on games early in life is, I always thought games are supposed to be fun. And, growing up in Jersey, there was, the next block over from our house, there was a kid that would come and live with his grandmother every summer, a kid named James. And it was within walking distance from our house, just a block up. And we became friends, my brother and I and this kid. And we'd go over to his grandmother's house, which weirdly enough always smelled like bacon, like all of the time. and
so did he kind of get like a nickname, like, hey, Bacon James, Or...
Yeah. Okay. Side note: they had this grape arbor in the back with wine grapes, I guess they're called, which are amazing, by the way. Just eaten right off the vine. Just squeeze them out of the skin. We would go out there and make ourselves sick eating grapes. But we would go over his house, and he loved games. That was the first time I'd ever played Monopoly, was over his grandmother's house. Okay. And Uno and all these other games. But I always hated it, just how, to go back, call back from earlier in the episode, how earnest he got about the games. He was very competitive and very serious and very earnest about winning. And I understand it's a competition in a sense.
Sure.
But there's nothing on the line here, really. It's like, can't we just have fun? I'm not saying go easy on me. But if you're going to hawkishly destroy me in the game, can't we just kind of make light of it and have fun with it? Why does it have to have such a serious nature to it? Because, it's a game. And for that reason, I just, after that, few summers, I never really enjoyed playing games much after that. And that's coming from a guy who is a competitive person by nature.
Yeah, right.
I'm very competitive. But, I guess I like different kinds of competition. We talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? Mm-hmm. Every time you spar, you are competing with someone. And I'm very earnest about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I guess I'm different on that particular type of, for lack of a better term, game.
Yeah. I guess okay, and that's a good point that you bring up. So it's not in your mind not so much about the game as it is the attitude in the game. You can be competitive without being nasty or cruel.
Yeah.
Or dry, because I don't know that anybody really likes to play with obnoxious people, who kind of.
Well, it's stupid, really, because at least in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the reason I feel somewhat competitive and earnest about Jiu-Jitsu is because you're not just playing a game; you are learning a real skill for life. You are learning something that is very useful. You could, there's all sorts of different directions. Not only can you defend yourself and others, someday you could start a business and teach that or something. There's also, and it teaches, in a sense, a form of discipline and such. Whereas I just don't see a whole lot of purpose in the game other than entertainment, which is fine. But if it's for the purpose of entertainment, why are we so earnest about it? So I don't know that. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but.
Okay, which I would see more than entertainment, but I guess deep down, basically, it is entertainment. It is just a diversion of some sort, because you're not really necessarily learning a life skill in a big picture way. Although, like I said earlier, for young people, really they are learning kind of the more covert skills, of strategy.
Yeah,
and
I guess
thinking
that's
and
fair.
rules and things like that. But okay, so that's an interesting point. What about, there was another kind of game I was going to ask about, and I don't remember, but maybe this was it. Okay, when you take it from what I would call, say, a hawkish game to a killing game, okay? It seems like a lot of games include you have to kill somebody, like video games I'm talking about now. And there's, it's... I don't know if you've ever played the game Ghost in the Graveyard.
Yeah.
Kind of idea. And I guess that's kind of what comes to mind, but it's not exactly like that. But, I have to eliminate one, or what, okay, here it is, like Mafia, the game Mafia.
Yeah,
Never played something like that. Now,
Sure.
I've never actually played that, but I've seen kids play it, or, just known of them playing it many times where, okay, somebody's the Mafia, somebody's the police, somebody's the citizen, blah, 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 blah. And, okay, everybody look up, now look down, blah, blah, blah. And somebody in the Mafia is trying to bump off all the citizens, So in a situation like that, where you're playing a game that you're supposed to be killing people, do you see any problem with that?
I can see some pitfalls in that, for sure. But again, I think it's more nuanced than that. I don't want to make it sound so black and white because,
Yeah.
If we're going to say
the danger there is to try to make it so generalized that it's in a huge category, black or white.
Right. Because, if we're going to say something that perhaps sounds sensational, there are some forms of aggression and violence that are acceptable and even valuable. For instance, we talked a moment ago, self-defense, and there's, of course, national defense, which would be like war. And so on.
Yeah, I was thinking about the game like Risk. Well, war is a real thing.
Right.
The military is good.
And even capital punishment is a form of violence that is biblically acceptable. If we're going to say that there's something wrong with imaginative violence and aggression, then there are portions of the Bible we would have to tell our kids, you're not supposed to read that. Because there's, of course, violence depicted in Scripture.
Good point, yeah.
And... I suppose some could make the argument that a lot of the modern games are mostly gratuitous violence. So there's no...
Define. What do you mean by that?
There's no need for it to be as graphic as it is.
Okay. Okay. Gratuitous meaning kind of like over the top to...
right. It's violence and gore just for the sake of extra violence and gore. And I know that studies go back and forth on whether or not that creates school shooters and mass murderers. I just can't tend to accept the notion that that's always a good thing, that kids play games like that. It doesn't seem healthy to me. My conscience is bothered by the gratuitous violence of it. But you can't really also say that there isn't some element of the male or masculine nature that is aggressive by nature, and
Yes.
and gravitates even towards violence. I mean, long before there were video games, kids were making swords out of sticks and
Sure.
fighting in the yard, stabbing each other with them and pretending to die on the ground. That's depicting violence. In a sense, you could say that was the precursor to kids doing that with a video game. It's just, the video games make it overly gratuitous, and it almost glorifies the killing, whereas kids just playing in the yard like that, it seemed more simpler because it just glorifies conflict, and boys by nature gravitate towards the defeating, victory in conflict. So one glorified the conflict, the other glorifies the violence.
That's interesting. Wow, what a distinction there. And I see it. I see it that a simple toy, the way that it would have been organically, highlighted a good thing, or sort of fed that natural desire of a boy to dominate and to be aggressive and things like that, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Because I love the military, and and I appreciate men who serve and they go into things like that, and obviously some of our men, especially in the elite levels, are trained killers, but that mindset, I don't know that they would even agree that every boy ought to have their knowledge of what it is to kill a man, and 17 ways to kill a guy.
Yeah.
And when you go into a video game and you're slicing somebody's throat, or you're whatever, and you're just like, oh goodness, what,
Yeah.
or you're gunning them down, and you see them as real human beings. At a certain point, you're like, what, what, how good is this? I looked up one list of, top 10 games for the year 2020. Now, I'm full transparency here. I don't know the game. I haven't really watched the trailer. But interesting, just as I look at this picture, that the number one game, according to this list, is called Hades.
I've not heard of that.
Okay. Of course, then there's Spider-Man. Then there's Last of Us Part 2. And then there's one called, Among Us, which I have seen. Among Us, which is kind of this like really cartoonish version of Mafia, basically, with these little guys walking around, and you don't see any graphics. You basically see it's kind of primitive in its look intentionally.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, oh, you're dead. Now we have to vote on who did it. And that's kind of back to the Mafia thing where, somebody pulled my thumb down. Who was it? What kid in this circle was it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To me, that's not so graphic. It's just it put it in a graphic medium. But anyway, and then so I'm struck just a little bit as I look at the picture and go, oh, that's interesting. The number one game is Hades. I mean,
is that a killing game?
What kind of influence? Do you know what the it says so-called roguelike games, which focus on difficulty, replayability, and repeated deaths, have been in vogue for the past decade, but Hades marks the subgenre's highest peak yet. In this spectacular run-based game, players take on the role of Hades' son Zagreus as he attempts to escape the Greek underworld, battling notable heroes and receiving support from the whole of the pantheon. The art is stellar, the varied combat is delightful, and the progression systems are inspired. Hades reinvents how a story can unfold in a game meant to be played over and over again. The picture is of some sort of a warrior and a snake, with these fangs and stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, honestly, I can't speak to the game itself, but it's just in the imagery, and you can see this probably in certain cartoons and certain, artwork these days, how vivid and almost demonic it can be.
Sure.
Sometimes, and I'm sure that. Anyway, I know there's video games out there that are, like you say, gory. They're too realistically, graphically violent.
Let me ask you this.
I think
go ahead. Sorry.
We make a good distinction, though. That's right. We make a good distinction, though, that not all war games are the same.
Right.
When I'm talking about risk and I'm rolling the dice and I'm moving a few of my soldiers across the border to take over Brazil, it's not the same as, on a video game, vicariously sneaking up behind somebody and slicing their throat.
Right, yes, because the difference between conflict and the violence,
gory violence,
the gratuitous violence. So, because I think it's good for kids to learn conflict and competition, but the gratuitous violence is not necessary. When I was a kid, I remember when home-based video game consoles became a thing. When Sega Genesis, I think it was, or no, before that it was
Nintendo, wasn't it?
No, even before that, Atari.
Yep.
And one of my neighbor friends had one of those. We didn't, so we'd play games over his house. And then eventually we got a Nintendo, and we didn't have it long. Something happened to it. I don't remember what. I don't know if it got taken away or something because we did it too much. I have no idea what happened to it. But before that, it was arcades. You had to go someplace to play video games, and we had
pay through the nose.
Yeah, we had this at the Brunswick Square Mall there in East Brunswick, New Jersey. We would go, not a lot, but we'd occasionally be at the mall and be like, hey, can we go play some video games or whatever? So we'd go in the arcade there, but it had a little semi-automatic gun there, and the slide on the gun would actually move backwards when you would pull the trigger.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
on you had a physical gun like in your hand.
Yeah, and it had a cable attached to the console, and the slide moved back with such force that it actually caused some recoil, and your hand would move. So the gadgetry of it felt really neat. What the characters that you were shooting at were not people; they were aliens.
Okay. Yes. Uh-huh.
So when you'd shoot them, they would explode in this, cloud of green or purple goo, and ooze onto the floor, and then of course disappear, because that's the way things work in games, I guess. Does it make? I mean, obviously that's gratuitous violence. You shoot a living creature and it explodes into a pile of goo, but is there something different that it does to the mind when it is human gratuitous violence versus some fictitious alien creature? Is there a difference?
Well, there's certainly, I have to say at the outset, certainly seems to be. I mean, you just have to say by the very feel of it. I think because the conscience is trained, in kindness or in respect, or that's not how you treat people. You be nice. But nothing in you says you can't shoot a green blob called an alien.
Right.
I
think it has to do with...
It's like shooting a rock, for that matter.
Sure, yeah. Well, it has to do with our innate knowledge that man is made in the image of God. And I think even lost people understand that in their conscience to a point. Now, their conscience, of course, is often confused. But I think people obviously know human violence is worse than shooting a fictitious alien creature. And they may not understand why, but we would say it's because man is made in the image of God. He's a living soul. And there is a sanctity to human life that there is not for other types of life.
Even pro-choice demonstrates that, because they have to redefine what's in the woman in order to salve the conscience to kill it.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, you want to kill that baby? Well, people aren't going to go for that. But if you say, it's just a mass of tissue, it's just a fetus
gob of goo,
or what? Yeah, then sure, it's your choice. Do what you want to do. But if you reframe it into actual terminology and say, so pro-choice means I have the choice to kill my baby. Oh, well, nobody really deserves that choice. Then it changes the whole expression, because even they understand the innate perception of the value of life.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good point, is that, yes, so you're actually dealing with the conscience as it relates to human life. One other question for you. Okay, this is the one I was thinking about. What about games where you're encouraged to lie. Not that you have to lie, but you're at a distinct disadvantage if you don't. Like where I have to convince you of something that's not true, i.e., say in something like that mafia game. No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. I think it was so and so. I think it was so and so.
Yeah. Well,
to try to distract people. What's your take on that?
A couple different things, I think, and I'm kind of going off the cuff here as far as what's coming to my mind right away. But there is an agreement entered into when people play such a game that we're going to be lying to each other. We're going to be trying to deceive each other. It's part of the agreement of the game. So I can't necessarily say I see any moral issue with that, because we're agreeing to that we're going to do that. For fun. I think what maybe you're getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the idea of playing a game that teaches a skill that we really don't want our kids to have.
Exactly. It gets you used to something that you should never be using in life.
Yeah. But comparing that to, say, let's say we were just talking about the killing games and such that, learning violence of sorts, even kids playing out in the backyard, learning to fight with each other, just tussling on the ground and so on. Not something we really want them going around the world doing, being violent with people. Is there a comparison?
Well, the way you're saying that's good. I appreciate that, because that helps me to crystallize it in my mind. What am I wanting my children to learn? And so by playing a game, do I want you to learn strategy? Yes. Do I want you to learn rules? Yes. Do I want you to learn creativity? Do I want you to learn endurance in conflict? Do I want you to, learn these things? Even in a sword fight, do I want you to learn how to be manly and stand up and be strong? Yes. But what I don't want you to learn is is how to be good at being deceitful, how to be violent. You know what I mean? I think there's another consideration though in a game like Mafia, or any game where your intent is to lie to each other. Do we want our kids to have the skill of knowing how to identify a liar? Yeah, I suppose so.
Because I think the alternative would be for our kids to be very gullible. And, I think there are some stereotypes sometimes, unfairly so, but there are stereotypes that very conservative Christians are gullible. I'm around unsaved people a lot. I hear the stereotypes. I know about it. I've had many conversations with unsaved people about it and trying to correct their stereotypes graciously. But
I guess,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I guess the question is more, do they need to become a liar in the game in order to learn to spot a liar? Is there not a better way to expose them to liars? Than say, here, why don't you practice trying to be deceptive yourself?
There may be better ways, but in the process of learning how to identify a liar, you are learning how to lie.
Right.
You just might not be doing it in practice at the moment. You could have an instructional lesson. Okay, child, here is the marks of a liar. They will change their story repeatedly throughout your conversation. Step 1. Okay. Step 2, they're going to oftentimes appear nervous or forgetful. If you ask them to remember their story weeks later, they won't remember it, and so on. That you can give them all the practical things about lying, but what you're actually teaching the child is, okay, if I'm going to lie, I need to relax. If I'm going to lie, I need to remember what I said and not change my story. So they're not practicing it, but they are understanding how to do it. Whereas with the game, you are having them actually do both at the same time. They are practicing lying and they are learning how to lie simultaneously.
Interesting. Well, I guess, I mean, yeah, I appreciate the perspective. Can't say that I personally like it. And this is where,
it's not ideal.
yeah, and this is where I would encourage parents, that, you're, as a parent, you're in that God-given position to direct your children, and God gave your children you. And so think through it, and what you don't feel comfortable with, communicate to your children and communicate why. I remember some years back, Lego came out with some, of course, Lego is very thematic. Now we have our Batman Legos. Now we've got our Hobbit Legos. Now we've got our whatever Lego. Whatever is like the rage at the time, there's a Lego set, which, okay, good for them. Kind of the marketing model. But they had this one, and I think it was Legos, and it was like these, I feel like I'm saying it wrong. Do you remember when we were younger, we had the Chia Pet? Remember
Yes.
that? The Chia Pets you could buy and like slather that stuff on the outside, and then they grew, and I mean, that's kind of silly.
We never had one, to my knowledge.
No, it's just the commercial, chia.
Yeah. But what's weird is that there was something oddly satisfying in the commercials about that stuff getting smeared across the thing. And you're like, that's cool. I want to try that.
I want to spread Dijon mustard
Yeah.
over a ceramic thing of my mother. Say, Mom, can I borrow this vase here? But anyway, so I'm saying chia because it seemed like it was chia something, but I think I'm maybe getting the word a little bit wrong. But it was like these characters, and they had this chi or this power, that could come through them. And I told the boys, I'm not real comfortable with that concept of channeling power through you. And where's that coming? And so I just expressed that to them, and they took it just fine. And they would go, yeah, we don't want that. We don't want that. And in the whole discussion of, and anyway, this is another topic, but, going to the Lord of the Rings, okay? I can see both sides of that. I can say, okay, it's a story. People write a story with the characters they want. I have other, thoughts on that. But then the other side says, no, there's a wizard in it. Bible says wizards are wrong. Boom. Okay. But again, you've kind of got that. You've got that biblical feel of somebody with power that's not God. Anyway, and so with those Legos, I was saying, I'm not really familiar or comfortable with that. And so somewhere in that line, as Tom and I have been talking here, somewhere between a sword fight out in the front yard with sticks and the highly intense graphic video game where you're gunning down people and knifing them and slitting throats or whatever, and I can't name the game for you, but I feel like I've seen one in the past or heard about one in the past, specifically kind of violent like that, and I'm sure there's many. But somewhere in between those two, you're probably going to draw your line, and it's not going to be the same place as somebody else's line of what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Saying, well, at that point, you begin to go, I don't like that. Well, communicate that to your kids. Now, maybe not to your 2-year-old, but I mean, when they get older and like, why can't I play that? Just say, even if you don't have it all figured out. When you say, Tom, to say, maybe I don't have like this really gelled answer on this thing, but I'm just going to tell you, I feel like it's exposing you to things that are too graphic, and I don't want you to get used to that.
Right, sure. Yeah, I think that's a fair way of saying it. I am curious, though. I mean, obviously, the violent game, our concern is that it would train our kids to use gratuitous violence, unnecessary violence, immoral violence. But, going back to, you mentioned like the Lego figure, the little thing that has some sort of power that it uses or whatever. I'm curious, what is our suspected prognosis there? So, like, you buy your kid a Lego thing that has some power, little character that's supposed to have some power. What is that going to teach our kid to do? Like, what's the prognosis? Is he eventually going to become a Wiccan?
Well, I think sometimes we maybe mock the step as being all in one. they're gonna play with they're gonna play with a Lego, and next thing you know, they're gonna be Satanists. No, but it's
Sure,
a direction.
it's an extreme example. I know, but
Yeah,
I'm just wondering what's the prognosis.
But I mean, I think other people would pose that, like, what, you really think this is going to happen? Well, if you're basically, what you allow in one area sets the stage for what you allow in the next area, and for the next step of what you're going to allow. It's like the one I can think of is music. People say, I can play an example of this soft rock, and they're like, oh, I like that song, yeah. And then I play this this heavy metal song over here, and they're like, oh my goodness, no, that's bad. That's bad music. Okay, now wait a minute. What allowed this music, the soft rock in the church, is the same argument that allows the hard rock. So once you open the door, once you say, oh no, music is amoral, music doesn't communicate, it's just a matter of the words, then everything is fair game. So you say, oh no, that's bad over there, but I like this over here. Well, on what argument do they rest? They rest on the same argument. So
sure.
If I say, well, I'm going to allow this, well, then, Dad, what's wrong with this? Well, then what's wrong with this over here? Well, then what's wrong with this over here? And you kind of have to keep allowing more and pointing their feet in a certain direction, I feel like, that in time may lead them to something. And even if it's not in their life, they become a Wiccan. Okay, but what if they, loosen their belt, or they say, okay, I'm more comfortable with, way more than Dad was comfortable with. Well, then what are their kids going to want?
Yeah. Well,
they're going to be on the edge of what their parents want. And so maybe your grandkids now are going to be entertaining things that you're like, whoa, no, I don't think that's good at all. And they're like, oh, but by gradations, they've ended up out there. And so
is that a guarantee?
It is kind of a direction thing.
Because what you're describing is the slippery slope, which we have actually on this podcast, both of us denounced the slippery slope before as not being an absolute. In other words, some people, by taking a step in one direction, will slide down a slippery slope into compromise, whereas others do not. And if there are exceptions, then we can't say that it's an absolute, because when you look at something that's clearly not wrong and something that clearly is wrong, and there's this kind of gradation in between that we call the slippery slope, right? At a certain point, when they've moved from left to right down, towards that slope, they're still not doing anything wrong. At a certain point, that shifts. Okay, it's kind of like one preacher said one time, I don't know where the ocean and the shore meet. I don't know where that happens, but I know when I'm in over my head. He says, I know when I'm in the deep. There's a certain point where someone has progressed down the slippery slope, but they haven't done anything wrong yet. And then that changes. And I think that's where a lot of the argument and debate in Christian circles comes, is some say, you've sinned the moment you move. And others say, you haven't sinned until you've got all the way down to the bottom of the slope. And both of them are wrong, right? Both of them are not factually correct. Does that make sense?
You're saying in terms of the illustration, some way part way down the slope is sinning. It doesn't have to get down to the bottom.
Well, to use the exact illustration we're talking about here, a little Lego character that uses some sort of, force power or something. You buy your kid a Lego like that. Have you done anything wrong? Well, the answer is no, right? And the extreme end of that is your kid becomes some sort of, Wiccan or Satanist, which is kind of an extreme example. But then clearly you're in the wrong at that point. Some would say you've sinned the moment you buy something like that for your kid. And I don't think that's correct.
Right, and that would be where I do think there is liberty.
Yeah.
I couldn't entirely agree that you haven't done something wrong if in buying it you violate your conscience.
Correct. I would agree with that.
And so, for one, and that's another discussion for another episode, which I think I have had on there before, but kind of like, can something be wrong for me that's not wrong for you? Well, in essence, yes.
Yeah.
At a certain point. So, and as far as it kind of depends on how we define the slippery slope, but still as a parent, I can't say, okay, X family in church who bought that set for their kids is wrong.
Right.
But for my child, I can say, I don't want it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's good. It doesn't mean that if my kid wants this set necessarily that he's wicked and wants to be wicked. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I'm wrong for refusing the set either.
Yeah. Yeah, and undoubtedly somebody might listen to what I'm saying, and someone who's maybe not quite as equitable, and they can say, oh, Tom, he's arguing for compromise. He's saying it's okay to move down the slippery slope. No.
No, I think you're acknowledging a gray area.
I'm acknowledging a gray area, and I think people need to be more honest about that, because there are clear examples in a multitude of subjects of people who have moved off of what many of us say, it's sin for them to do what they did. It's wrong. Well, it would have been wrong in our conscience if we'd have done it. But they haven't sinned. We might just look at them and say, oh, they're heading down the slippery slope. But yet we observed them and they never seem to. They just moved differently than we did.
Yes, and I think the part of the slippery slope that bothers me, that I don't agree with, is to say, if the slippery slope is saying that this change doesn't necessitate a full swing, I get that. But you can't deny either that a change may start a direction. I mean, this change starts them down the slope.
It certainly could, but a lot of folks think that because they're on the far end of the slope and they haven't moved yet, that they're not also susceptible to moving. And I think that's the issue. Is I stand over here and you're on the slippery slope. No, sorry, buddy, you have a sin nature. You're on the slope too.
Everybody's on the slope.
Everybody's on the slope.
Interesting point.
I had a guy say something like that to me one time.
Really?
Actually, it was about the podcast, because we laugh so much and we have a good time and we enjoy talking about these things. He seems like it's in the wrong direction. You're making light of important subjects, and of course that's an exaggeration. We don't make light of important subjects. But I said, have we done something wrong? And he said, no, but there's certainly the potential there. And I said, and you have no such potential? That's the problem, is people who see others on the slippery slope and they're like, oh, I'm not on the slippery slope. Yeah, you are.
And my contention, kind of the flip side of that slippery slope argument, is to say just because one doesn't necessitate the other doesn't mean I shouldn't block this one.
Say that again?
In other words, say, well, just because he buys that Lego doesn't mean he'll become a Wiccan, right? But doesn't also, on the flip side, it doesn't justify and say, well, go ahead and do all these first steps if you want. Start walking down the slope because it's not sin. I can still go, no, for me, the direction of my family, I don't want to point our feet down the slope. And that goes back to like the cliffs and fences argument.
Yeah.
I want to set my fence here. Now, could my kid set his fence another foot out and still be off the cliff? Yep. But I just want to express to them why I'm setting the fence where I'm setting it.
Right.
Because beyond that, personally, bothers me. Now, but that's part of the point of thinking through stuff like this and having these discussions, because you might think and go, I guess, to clarify, number one, what you're thinking, like you said, between the competition and warfare versus violence. Oh, okay, that's a good distinction. That's a good clarification. And then to think through things and go, well, maybe I'm not being consistent in how I apply this over here and apply that over there. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say we can't forget we have a giveaway to do.
That's right. We are at the end of our time. We're going a little over time, so we need to jump into our giveaway of our puzzler question. So Tom has entered the names that have responded into a randomizer. We're not actually picking out of a physical hat and saying, nah, throw that one back in and pick another one.
Yeah, random.org.
You put it into a random.org.
Random.org here.
And when you click the button, whatever shows number one is the winner. Whoever shows number one, correct?
Okay, correct. All right, we ready?
Yes, we are.
In 3, 2, 1, random. And the winner is, you ready for it?
I'm ready.
It is Nathan.
Nathan. Hey, all right.
Nathan has won.
Congratulations, Nathan.
Yes, and Merry Christmas to Nathan.
Yes.
You've won Practical Happiness by Bob Schultz.
Yeah. Yes.
You won practical happiness.
You've won practical happiness.
Yeah.
Well, man, I wish I'd have listened to that podcast. I didn't know I could win practical happiness. Practically, yeah, if you listen to this podcast.
Well, we will be in touch, Nathan, about how to get that to you the best way we can. But thank you for playing, everybody, and we appreciate it. Anything else?
No, probably ought to let you go. We hope you have a blessed Christmas, and I hope it's a refreshing, a relaxing time for you. Be thinking, be willing to engage folks in conversation, and be bold to be who you are with your faith. All right.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. We are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.